Well, hey folks, today I'm going to be reacting to a video that is about, amongst other things, whether it's important for Christians to have an official marriage certificate when we get married.
I got to share this with you guys. I was just talking to a buddy of mine that I went to school with this past 2 years, and we were talking about he's about to get married. I told him, hey bro, learn from my lesson. Do not get a marriage license. I said, go through the whole thing, go through the wedding, go through everything. She's already your wife. If you want to have a nice little ceremony just to celebrate that she's your wife, go ahead, but do not get that marriage license. Getting a marriage license is like this. It's like, for example, when I used to play for the Packers, I had a great coach, and he used to have a saying. He used to tell me, I'm going to make you do things that you don't want to do, so that you can go to places that you always wanted to go. And you know something? He rode, I'm talking about he rode me. Hard. I got chewed out so bad, everybody in the whole practice field knew I was getting chewed out by coach. And I hated it, but I loved it because he did make me do things I didn't want to do. Well, husband, how can you make your wife holy? How can you sanctify her if you don't have what it takes to be able to push her and make her do things that she doesn't want to do so she can be sanctified, holy, and set apart? That's what a husband is called to do according to Ephesians chapter 5. Love your wife like Christ loved the church. Well, when you have a marriage license, can you imagine if they added one thing to my contract that I can determine the pay of my position coach, just on how I feel? I can determine his pay year in and year out. Do you think he would have pushed me? And when you get a marriage license, that's exactly what you're doing. The wife now determines your pay. She can destroy you. She can destroy your family when she gets emotional, and the devil comes in and starts spinning in her ears and telling her what she's missing out on.
All right, so a lot to talk about with this. First of all, just in general, when we're talking about having a marriage certificate, well, certainly if we're looking into the earliest biblical times, like when Isaac is getting married to Rebekah in the book of Genesis, there's not an official marriage certificate. When you get a little bit further into the nation of Israel, there might be a little bit more as far as official documents. But what there always was there was a community recognition. There was a community recognition that these people are married. And part of this was that there were stakes in this for the community as a whole. The community as a whole had an investment in this. That certainly was true because of children, but just also because they care about both members of this marriage, and they care about keeping them together. So what certainly is true is we as Christians should not be looking to avoid the community when we get married. I know that there are people that advocate that we should move to an idea that the state is completely kept out of marriage and that it's something that's done in more religious organizations. I think that's not impossible, but that's a little bit tricky because you still have kids involved. But on the whole, what I'd say is I think that Christians absolutely should go get a marriage certificate. I think that we absolutely should go and do that because it's a way of us saying to the community, we are binding ourselves together. We're not trying to avoid accountability. We're not just saying me and you against the world. We're saying we are participating in a sense, we're inviting the community into this.
And then all of a sudden, you're just trying to make her holy, trying to love on her like Christ loved the church, and then she just goes buck wild. And because you gave your strength to a woman, and the Bible talks about in Proverbs chapter 31, verse 3, don't give your strength to a woman.
All right, so the verse that he's citing there, that's not what it's about. It is not about marriage. It's not about the idea that your wife has rights within marriage. It's about the idea of a king giving his attention and giving his pursuit to a multitude of women, and then also to getting drunk. So what he's using there, he's cherry picking. This is not good. This guy has clearly been hurt. This clearly, at least in his perspective, he got taken to the cleaners. He got brutalized in his marriage by his wife leaving him and abandoning him. And what he's talking about, it's tough because what he's talking about, he's quoting Ephesians and talking about husbands, love your wives, and the idea of sanctifying and presenting her holy. His analogy, I understand he's a football player, but his analogy to the football coach, I think, is a bad analogy. I think it's a bad parallel, partly because men and women are just different. And so I think that there is something appropriate and manly about men with one another being harder on each other. And the whole idea of I'm going to, whatever you said earlier, I'm going to sort of like do things that you don't want to do so that I'm going to make you do things that you don't want to do so that you'll end up where you want to be. I think that is good within the masculine world. I think that's good and healthy and can be done really well. I think that doesn't translate great into the role of women. I think that there's a level of gentleness that just is needed there. And when we're thinking of loving the church as loving our wives as Christ loved the church, it doesn't mean that there's never a time where a husband would tell his wife no or bring sort of like correction to say, I think that you're off base here. That all certainly is fair game. That is how Jesus loves us as a church. But the idea that it's like, hey, in marriage, you got to be really telling her like, hey, no, get your act together. You've got to, like, that is a bad setup for marriage. That is a bad setup for how you treat a woman. And even if you said, well, it worked for me, man, men and women are different. That does not work well that way. So I think he's setting up a parallel that's a really bad parallel and a really bad roadmap for any man who's looking to love his wife as Christ loved the church.
Getting a marriage license gives your strength away. So I just want to warning. I'm talking to all men. If you are a breadwinner, do not give your wife, do not get a marriage license. I repeat, do not get a marriage license. It sucks, man. Once you get that, you are locked and loaded unless you're ready to lose it all. And that's what you're going to end up doing, is losing it all, not just money. I'm talking about you're going to...
This is so sad to me. Now, this does seem to be mostly coming down to money. And I absolutely believe that there's an argument to be made for, especially in our no fault divorce laws, that those disproportionately hurt men. And so a man can end up in a situation where nobody's perfect, but maybe it's like, hey, he's a good enough guy and a good enough husband and is trying to keep his family together, but his wife decides to leave him. As in 70 to 80% of divorces, the wife is the one who initiates it. So if it's like, hey, this is a good enough guy who's trying to love his family and is trying to keep his family together, but his wife decides, nope, I want out of this, that she can go and she gets half, or there's all these things that come along with it. So I get the argument of like, we need to do something about this, or maybe we need to get rid of no-fault divorce, which I think would be great to get rid of no-fault divorce. I think no-fault divorce is terrible. I think he's aiming at the wrong target here. I think that he should be aiming at no-fault divorce, but instead he's aiming at the marriage license for some reason, the marriage certificate being the problem in the situation.
So when you're going to lose your children, you're going to lose it all. So don't make the devil job easy. Getting a marriage license makes it easy to break up homes. If I didn't have a marriage license and me and my wife just lived together and I treated her just like I would as a wife, my family will still be intact. But because my wife had the power, just basically like a kid, just destroying everything and can't even control herself. So anyway, take heed to what I'm saying. Don't get a marriage license. This is better than a prenuptial agreement. Just don't get a marriage license and you will be good to go. Shalom, shalom.
The last part is bizarre, where he talks about the idea of my family would still be together, and my wife and I would still be together if we would have never got a marriage license. Obviously, I don't know his story. That seems like a bizarre thing to say, and to say getting a marriage license makes it easier to break up a family. It definitely objectively doesn't. Now, we have no-fault divorce. We make it pretty easy to get a divorce in our culture, but it still is a process that you have to go through, and there still are costs associated with it. And so the only thing, I'm like, if you're not married, she can still leave you. In fact, it's easier than if you were married. She can still take your kids from you. In fact, custody would be arguably more difficult if you weren't married to her at some point, if you're just the children's father. The one thing that I think is different is her rights to your money would at least be different. She could still get child support, but maybe if you weren't married, unless you could prove some common law idea, she wouldn't get half of your stuff. So that seems to be the only plus that I'm seeing here for him, is like, well, the plus is that she wouldn't have access to all my money. It would have been my money. I do not think that they still would have been together if this would have gone a different way. And I think it's also sad because he clearly was hurt, And we clearly do have a problem in our culture with wives being the primary ones ending marriages. But the idea that he's looking at the situation and clearly seeing like, hey, this is just what women do. This is what's going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to you. This is what's going to happen to you. Good luck being in any kind of relationship if that's your perspective toward women. That's not going to work whether you're married or not. If your perspective towards women is just, hey, they're going to look to take me for all that I'm worth. So very sad, clearly has been very hurt, got took to the cleaners. Let's say maybe his ex-wife, she was completely in the wrong and really, really deeply wronged him. The way to respond is not with bitterness and cynicism. And this guy could get to a much healthier point with some shepherding and some guidance that would help him to get rid of, to deal with his bitterness, to see women as a whole differently and not through this deeply cynical lens. And once again, on the whole, I think until our culture gets to a point that there is some robust way that we as Christians are saying, here's how we're having community investment in marriage without the state being involved, go get the marriage license, go through the process. It still is worth doing. It still is a way that we make our vows known to the community.